Hello and welcome back to another one of Forward Camera's camera tutorials. Today I'm going to be talking about what can go wrong with your Polaroid Originals film. So let's first take a look at a good example of what can go right. This is when you use the correct temperature outside or inside between 55 degrees Fahrenheit and 82 degrees Fahrenheit, or 13 degrees Celsius to 28 degrees Celsius. As you can see here, the colors aren't off. It's that sort of dreamy feel that you expect from the film itself. And there's no issues along the boundaries of the film. The film was properly shielded from the light after ejection. And you can see maybe there's like a little bit over here, perhaps like the spreading of the chemical could have been an issue, but mostly okay. This was taken with my SX70. So that being said, temperature is very important. If you're shooting at the wrong temperature, if it's too cold or way too hot, above those or below those markings, then you might have issues with the way the picture comes out. So that being said, this is what can go right. And not also for SX70 film, you want to shoot 1/3 darker. Usually that's kind of the rule, but you know, it could be a little bit less, a little bit more, because the ASA of this film is a little bit higher than, I hear it's higher than what it used to be, so it's recommended to do that. So let's talk about what can go wrong. Number one, shooting with expired film. Now, many people would argue that it's no issue shooting with expired film. Now that depends on how the film was stored. If you don't know how it was stored, if it was in refrigerator the entire time since production, then you could have all sorts of issues that arise. So here's an example of expired I-type film that I took a photo of some flowers, okay, some lotus flowers. You can see that it's very faded. I also took this photo in the heat of the summer, so it tinted it a little bit more pinkish color, I guess you can say, if you look really carefully, even though the frame is pink. And you can see that it lost a lot of its contrast. And within the frame, there's some issues too that might not necessarily have to do with the film being expired. One, you'll notice that over here, after ejection, generally there might be this sort of issue where some of the light hits the frame too early. And so having your picture exposed to light early on, without it being properly shielded, you can get these sorts of lighter splashes of color, and sometimes there are lines that go through the photo. You must always shield your photo from the light for at least 15 minutes, I recommend, afterward for Polaroid original film, unlike the Instax. So you should put it in your pocket or somewhere out of the light, or fold it on upside down on the table and not let any light get on it when it develops. And never shake your photo like it says in the songs or whatever, because that might affect the development. Another thing, well, this film, I think, might have went through the X-ray machine, so there might have been some sort of X-ray stuff going on here. I'm not sure about that when I took it to China, but I wasn't entirely sure where I stored my film. I can't remember, so that I can't say. But you can see here, expired film. And this is actually a pretty good version of the expired film, so not too bad. Now let's talk about some other failures with the film. So here we have a couple of things that were going on at the same time. One, the chemicals dried out. So this is, when you see this, that means the chemistry most likely dried out. And also it could be this area here. This particular frame had issues. This happens sometimes with the film. I shot it also during a very cold day. And you can see that it's closer in tint towards the blue spectrum. So if it's very cold, it might, for color film, it might be a lot more blue in your sort of photo. If that's what you're looking for, okay. You're also lacking some contrast. So it's a good example of what happens when it's beyond the 55 Fahrenheit range. You can see here, it wasn't properly shielded. Sometimes you'll see these lines. It could be two things. One, it's the sun might have hit the photo in certain areas and overexposed it in certain areas and affected the chemistry. Or two, there might have been dirt on the rollers. So that sometimes happens when there's a line going through your photo. So here's an example of something that did not go quite right for a number of reasons. This one most likely had to do with Polaroid originals, but the change in color was because I shot it way too cold outside. So that's one example. Here's a black and white example of shooting in the cold. So many times the contrast kind of is not as good. I like the photo anyway, but the contrast is not as good. The development, right, because it's chemistry, some parts develop faster than others. And when that happens, you'll notice that some areas are darker or lighter, see? And so because it's chemistry, it's science, so some reactions would go faster than others. Even though I kept this in my inside pocket, it still didn't develop properly. And you'll notice here, right, that could be because of the cold, or it could be that the sun hit this area first, even though it was blinded by the dark shield that comes out of my eye, of my 1-step plus. But mostly okay. I think that the cold weather treats the black and white film better than it does the color film. I'll let you see side by side what it looks like, because, well, it's black and white. But let's take a look at another example of cold weather affecting black and white film. So it loses a lot of the contrast as the field. You'll notice that a lot of the background kind of goes away. Here you'll notice the clouds kind of faded. Here a lot of the flowers in the background, or the weed, not flowers, the different types of plants and stuff, were a little difficult to see, and you can see the same sort of issue at the bottom here of the frame. And another example, not too bad with the colds, I shielded this one, but you'll see these are supposed to be, I guess, electrical posts. You can't see them in the background. It wasn't able to capture those details. And I actually noticed that sometimes, like if it's far away, parts of the image, it goes away even when it's the proper temperature. So you should really shoot things, in my opinion, shoot things a lot closer. And with the cameras, the metering systems are actually pretty just kind of basic. So you don't necessarily want to have like an overly bright sky and a very, very dark foreground. You want to focus on one or the other, because the metering will like blow out the light versus the dark, or the dark versus the bright. So balancing can be very tricky with Polaroid cameras. I tried to balance it by just kind of, this was a very bright sky, but just focusing on the plants themselves would help the metering, but because this was an expired film, it didn't come out the way I wanted to. And you'll notice that for my apple, the sky was very bright, but I focused directly on the one object, and I think portraiture and also close-up stuff like this would work very well with this camera. And the last one I want to talk about is an example of the sort of lines that I talked about, or the development issues with the sun hitting the photo. You can see that there. Beyond that, what I wanted to say is that for this type of film, shooting in the correct temperature, very important. Storage, you want to keep it in the fridge and then take it out of the fridge for at least several hours before you shoot, so that the film chemistry all becomes like the temperature of the room. I've kind of experimented where I took it out within the hour like they recommend, and it still kind of came out wonky. So let it kind of sit on the table flat and put it in their fridge flat, and let it, you know, stay stored in the fridge until you're ready to shoot. So just to kind of look again at all these different photos here, you can see the issues that arise or can arise when you're shooting expired, or when you're just shooting even film that's not expired but at the wrong temperature, or issues just in general. So thank you so much for watching. Please follow our YouTube channel and make sure that you subscribe, as well as check out our Instagram at Forward Cameras, our Twitter at Forward Cameras, our Facebook Forward Cameras, and our Etsy shop Forward Cameras for more vintage cameras for sale. Thank you so much. Take care.